Let's understand what is training, validation, and the testing data split and why we need them in this video. Let's start with why we need to split the data set. In order to answer that, we want to understand why we use the data. So the data is basically used to train a model, right? So we train a model using data, and normally we use the data that we have. Once the model is trained, what we will do is we'll use that model. We call that as a trained model, and that trained model will be used on a new or unseen data to predict something, right? So this is how we will use the trained model. Now, this new data is not available at this point. We can't use this for training our model. But at the same time, when we train our model using past data, we want to know how this model is going to perform on an unseen data. Because that is the objective of this model, right? So once the model is developed or trained, we want to use that model on an unseen data. So how do we know how this model performs on an unseen data during the training? Because that is what we are interested in, right? So we don't want a model that performs well on a past data. We want to create a model that performs well on a new data. So basically we need some way to test whether the model, the trained model, performs well on a new data or not. Here the new data doesn't have to be future data. New data is basically unseen data, the data that we have not used during the training process. So that is what this new data means. Now, how do we do this? Okay, so we have our data set like this, and this data set can be split into two parts. Okay, so the first part is called the training part and the second part is called the test part. Usually people go with a 70-30 split. They'll use 70% for training data and 30% for the test data. So we will develop the model using the training data. Once the model is developed, we'll use the test data to measure how good that model is on an unseen data. This works until the test data is not used to choosing a model. If you are using the test data to choose a model, then this is not going to work, because if we have done that, then the test data is also used in developing a model. So if you have created multiple models using training data, then you use the test data on each one of them to see how good that model is performing. And then if you have picked one of the best performing model, then the model development process included the test data as well to decide which model to go with as a final result, right? So in a way, the test data also influenced the development of a model. And if we have done that, then this test data is no longer a test data because we have used this during the training itself or the model development process itself. So on those scenarios, just having these two splits won't work. We need something more. And that is when we'll create three splits. Okay, so we'll have training split, then we have something called a validation split, then we'll have testing split. Okay, so training split is basically used to train the model. We use this to train the model. Then the validation split will be used to make decisions, i.e. if we have multiple models that are trained using the training data, then if we want to choose one best performing model, then we will use the validation set. What we will do is we'll train multiple models and each one of those models will be tested using the validation set. Then the best performing model among those will be selected as a final model. Once the final model is selected, we want to publish how good that model is to the end users, right? That is when we'll use the testing dataset. So testing dataset is not going to influence how we develop our model. Once we have made all the decisions, once we have our final model, we want to share how good that model is on an unseen data, right? For that, we will be using the testing data set. Okay, so that is what we'll be using this testing data set for exclusively, and this will never ever be used for any decision making during the model development process or model development life cycle. So I just want to make this distinction really clear. So validation data set is not same as testing data set. Validation data set can be used during the model development cycle, but testing dataset cannot be used during the model development cycle. It can only be used at the very end once we have finalized the final model. Then you can use testing dataset to publish to the world how good that model is. Okay, so that is the only scenario for a testing dataset. I want to make it also clear these two terminology. We have something called model selection and we have another thing called model comparison. And I want to explain this with a small caveat that this is not a universal definition. This is a definition that I like. This is the distinction I like to keep in mind. So the first one is model selection. Model selection is where you are training multiple models using the same algorithm and you are picking one best performing model out of those trained model. So in this case, if you are using decision tree, you are creating multiple decision trees using the same training data, maybe with some different parameters like, the tree depth and stuff like that. Then you are choosing one best performing model among them. So that process is called model selection. Then we have something called model comparison. We'll have multiple models developed using different algorithms, but all of them are trying to solve a same problem. So you may want to classify some data. So you may be creating decision tree or you may be creating random forest. So these are different algorithms here, right? So we are picking many different algorithms to solve the same problem. Then once you have done that, you are picking a best performing model. So it doesn't matter what algorithm you pick, as long as you are picking a best performing model. That process is called model comparison. Again, like I said earlier, this is not a universal definition, but this is something that I would like to keep in my mind when I'm talking about model selection and model comparison. So one final step here is, once you have selected the model, once you have finalized your model, that model is just trained using the training data. Now, the validation data could have been used to train that model, right? So in order to avoid missing out the generalization that we might get with this validation data set as well, we will retrain the finalized model. So once we have selected our model that is going to be our final model, we'll retrain that model using both training and validation data set as one single data set. And that model will be used as a final model in practice. Okay, once that model is developed, we will use the test data set on that model to publish its performance on an unseen data. So that is how model development is normally done in practice. So that is all I wanted to share in this video. I hope this is useful. Thank you.